Fabulous.
You're recording? Good.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Media Shaman studio. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of the Mediasphere, which is a major key issue we're facing because we have such a liminal space in America, and especially in America, but also in the world. And a lot of it is sort of a collapse of traditional forms of media, or at least of the traditional forms of authority, where people trusted the media and said, "Oh, we can just turn on the 6 o'clock news and see what's happening, or just open up the newspaper and find out what's happening." And a lot of people don't trust them anymore, probably for some good reasons. So we're going to talk about that and where we go from here. And of course, this is Mark, who's the founder and director of the Integral Cinema Project, which is applying meta theories to media works and moving image works. And so take it away, Mark.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. For those who are here synchronously and asynchronously across space and time. Just one of the interesting kind of aspects of the media sphere. We're inside of it right now. So for those who are watching live, we're in the media sphere, but even when you're watching it asynchronously, you're hooking into the media sphere. So I just wanted to just give an overview of the media sphere real quick, what we're talking about and how to observe it. How do we kind of make it an object in our awareness and not get caught inside of it, and see if we could use it to figure out what's going on and stuff like that. So fundamentally, the media sphere basically is it's the entire media ecology. So it's the internet, it's VR, it's the video games, it's traditional television, cable, all of those, and even books and music. Like the ways we share things with each other that aren't local. So I share music with you. So all of that is part of the media sphere. And when we look at the internet, there's kind of three layers that they classically talk about. What's very much the same for the entire media sphere as well. So they talk about the surface web, the deep web, and the dark web. And so what that is that the surface media sphere or web is things that we could access easily and free and searchable. So it's like open access for everybody, like Google search and all that. And then they call the deep web those things that are special access, anything that's password protected, or that your private kind of space. So that includes everything from Netflix, those kind of services you're paying for, or the banking, or academic databases, all that stuff. And some of that is searchable and some isn't, but, and then when you go to the dark web, it's like you have to have a special browser and it's got to go, so it's even more isolated and harder to find. So when we're looking at the media sphere, it's important to understand that there's these layers of it. They're everywhere. And also, important point is that we often can think it is a direct reflection of reality. But one of my favorite quotes is from the filmmaker and theorist Jean-Luc Godard. And he said, "Art is not a reflection of reality. It is the reality of a reflection." And we could replace that with media. So media is not a reflection of reality, it is the reality of reflection. And what that means is that it is a pool of reflections from individual minds or collective. So it's like, it's like if I'm a creator of media, I've created it with my consciousness, and then I'm sharing that consciousness with you. But I'm reflecting, I'm creating something or capturing something from my perceptual field and sharing that. So, for example, um, we could get the impression that things are more concrete than they actually are. Like the idea of trolling, which is, trolls are people who try to stir things up. They'll throw, kind of communication bombs out into the media sphere just to disrupt. And they may not mean what they're saying. They're just doing, so there's this, so we have to kind of recognize that it's when we're looking at the media sphere, when we're looking at the information coming in, it is, we're filtering it with our biases, and all the sources were biased. That means all the material is biased. And so that's not a direct reflection of reality, but a reality of a reflection. So it's more like we're looking at our collective unconscious, which is very interesting because we could look at consciousness as having three similar layers. So we have our conscious field, that is what is easily accessible to us in the moment. Then we have the subconscious, which is opened up with certain kind of key triggers. So those are like the passwords or the keys. And then there's the deep unconscious, which is very hard for us to access. We have to, use practices and do all sorts of wild stuff to get in there. So just understanding that, we can step back a little bit when we're looking at the media sphere and try not to get too plugged into it emotionally and recognize, so that's like kind of bringing it as an object in our experience is the first thing we have to try to do. Well, actually the second thing. The first thing is what we're filtering and bringing in. So that's kind of vital. So I wanted to do a practice, but before I did it, I want to set up some of the structure that we're going to play with here. Jonathan, if you could throw up that slide. So when we're trying to assess what's going on in the world, reflecting using the media sphere, and this works actually not just in the media sphere, but in the reality sphere as well. So this kind of, I don't know if everyone is familiar with the situational analyses by Jordan Hall or Green Hall, but this is kind of like how to do your own situational analysis. And so if you haven't seen his work, I highly recommend it. But okay, so when we're looking at a situation, either in the reality sphere or the media sphere, we want to get the deepest and most expansive picture we can have in order to make the best assessment that we can. So understanding what those levels are, I mean, we could obviously break them down in different ways, but these breakdowns are based on some research. So that's kind of, um, that we did with our research into the coevolution of media, consciousness, culture, and society. So when we're looking at what's going on in the reality sphere or the media sphere, first level is the subjective level. So, I am experiencing this thing. So what am I bringing to it? And I'm going to use myself as an example so I could and what's happening right now in the world, just to give you a sense of it. Okay, so, and these levels are not always discrete, but intertwined. So first of all, I'll just go over the frames and then talk about what they mean. So we have the subjective level, what I'm bringing to it, the relational level. So when I'm hanging out with a friend or two, or a couple of friends, or my spouse, or a friend, we're hanging out, we're talking about stuff, so what that kind of the media sphere and the reality sphere are often intertwined, even in those spaces, even if we're in person, because we're getting a lot of our information from the media sphere that we're communicating with each other in the reality sphere. So like our relationships, so like if I'm in relationship with somebody who has an opposite political ideology than myself, understand, then we're kind of like realizing, all right, so in the relational level, the two of us here are coming from two different ideologies, and understanding that's part of your situational analysis. Then when you get to the group level, so that could be, your family, a team, a work group, those kind of things. And then the cultural level, your faith tradition, all that stuff. Then the social level, the social system, the legal system, all of these things, the structures of the society. And those are kind of the standard levels. And then we get to the meta level. And this is when we start to get into the bigger picture itself, where we try to see the bigger picture at these levels. So really kind of the meta level is one area, and I've broken it down into four kind of major frameworks. That is the psychosocial systemic, the pure systemic, the evolutionary, and the meta narrative. And again, these are often intertwined. So let me give you quick examples, and then what I want to do is for us to each kind of try it for ourselves. So I'm going to take current situation in the United States. And so what is happening right now in the post-election? We're looking at the media sphere, depending on which reality bubbles we're observing, we're seeing and hearing different perspectives, and so the first thing is for me to know my subjective frame that I'm bringing in. An example is, for me, I was raised in a post-Holocaust Jewish household, and I had a lot of relatives that were Holocaust survivors. And when I was young, I was told all these stories. But they also drilled into me that every human's responsibility was to make sure it never happens again to any group of human beings. And that was kind of part of my, relational, familiar, and cultural programming. So for me, the subjective, relational, group, and cultural fields are intertwined inside of me with that kind of experience. I bring it in. So when I'm looking at what's going on now, it's really kind of hard for me because the last 4 years, a lot of what's been happening is exactly what my relatives have told me was happening pre-Holocaust. So every like cell in my body is going, I have to do something about it. So that's the one example of how that affects how I look at everything. But if I'm aware of that, I could use the gift of it and be aware of the blind spots and the possible projecting. So once I have it as an object in my experience, I can use it. Right? So it gives me, I have a kind of a perceptual database of what to look for. But I also have to be careful of not to see that where it isn't really there. So, that's kind of the trick, So, and there's a lot of people now in our situation, especially, I think probably on both sides, that they're overreacting. There's each side sees an enemy and they're interpreting everything from that field. So once again, you see how you can start to unpack it from these things. And then you get to the social level. And so what's happening right now? Well, we know from the Mediasphere and that, the election is now going through courts. That's part of the social system. And we're kind of observing what's going on and interpreting it and all that. And the media is talking about it, and so that's kind of that level. Now, when we go to the meta level, then we get into an example is at the psychosocial systemic, you have media psychology, media archaeology, which is you're trying to, this level tries to incorporate all the previous levels. That's the key to the meta level, is it tries to integrate all previous levels into a bigger picture using a certain framework. And we want to be at least somewhere in the meta level framework to get the best perception we can. Because we can include all the others and start to see a bigger picture. So for example, one framework at this level is nonlinear warfare. And this is a new form of war. It's the postmodern form of war, and we're all in the middle of it right now. The civil war happening on social media in the Mediasphere is a clear example of nonlinear warfare. Understanding that now, I'm not going to go into big detail here. If you have our Media Shaman toolkit, I go into it deeper in there. If you don't have it, you could get it, no problem. But that is the level where we're looking at the field itself. So we've got the left and right kind of vying for each other. We've got fragments in the left, between progressive and liberal. It's like, so we've got these patterns, and we can go even further with some military strategists actually believes we're in the middle of World War III already, and we just don't know it because it's a different form of war, postmodern warfare. And if you're integral and you understand meta theory, then this makes perfect sense that that's happening, because we're kind of moving through this evolutionary field. Now that I'm skipping ahead. All right, so that is that framework. And then the systemic is more putting on the hat of the systems theorist, right? So looking at interconnectedness, complexity, contextuality, if you're familiar with the work of Nora Bateson and Warren Data, that is contextuality, looking at what's going on, not just from this hard data points, but the context around those data points. That's the Warren data. Then there's the evolutionary framework. So looking at this moment and what's going on as part of an evolutionary process. And then there's the meta-narrative framework. Now for media makers, this is an important one because it's like, so when we're media makers, especially documentary, we, and actually every human being, but especially media makers, we look for the story. So for example, in our current situation, it's like, I've been researching the media sphere and looking at it. And so what you want to do is like, look at all the actions and the words and actions happening in the field and see if you could find them a story that fits all the pieces. That's what we do in the documentary when we're investigating a situation. It's like, so this is, this piece, how do they connect, right? We're being detectives, and the mind automatically seeks a story. But a meta-narrative is kind of an integral story. So it's like looking at all the levels. So for example, meta-narrative that is happening right now is the great transition. We're in the great transition. We're in the age of transition. And that is an actual, that meta-narrative includes all the other narratives, including the evolutionary framework, the systemic, the psychosocial, and all the ones below that. And from a particular frame of that we are in the middle of this transition, this evolutionary transition, but it's framed as a story. See, that's a meta-narrative that we're going through this. And then there's the collective self meta-narrative, which goes even further into the, if you're familiar with integral, into the witness field, where we recognize, we look at what's happening from the framework of that this is, we are this one collective self. And scientifically, we are at the molecular level and then beyond into the quantum and all that. We are one thing, we're an ocean of molecules vibrating at different frequencies with this, So, but when we hold that frame and look at, what's happening here, what's happening, what is the collective kind of process we're going through? What is the collective shadow? Real quick, I wanted to, real quick, this is, for example, when we're looking at what's going on now, we're both from the collective self and the great transition framework, we are called upon to do two different, work through two different orientation fields is the best I could frame it now. And that we could talk about the phrase I heard as a kid, never again, and then add the phrase never before. So never again is looking for the rise of the collective shadow and trying to transcend it. And never before, we are also called upon to do the never before is in this transformation age, we're required to go into a future unlike the past. So we're kind of, at least for a media shaman anyways, for us that want to try to contribute and use media in some form, we're required to do both here. We can't just sit and imagine a future unlike the past. And actually, I would say that we can't do that without dealing with the shadow. We have to be able to let that go. Because if we don't first work with the shadow, it's going to infect what we project forward. So in order to find that future unlike the past, we have to use a phrasing that is often used in these two fields. We have to both think about the unthinkable in the now and think the unthinkable future. So it's a subtle shift, and these two phrases have been used in these two ways. So it's like thinking about the unthinkable is what my ancestors talked about, that when horrific things start rising in the collective field, there is a collective cognitive dissonance that we can't believe. We don't even want to look at or think about those things. They talked about that even the minorities who were being targeted in the Holocaust, a lot of them couldn't believe it was actually happening. They were, as Hitler was coming to power, it was like, oh, he's an idiot, or, he's mentally ill, and it's not going to, all of the, so it's not being able to think about the unthinkable is a problem we have to solve to get through this with as little suffering as possible. It's that we have to deal with the shadow, and to deal with the shadow, we have to face the shadow. And once we face the shadow, we could let go of it and try to find that new space, that new future. So that's kind of, and that is when we're working at the meta level of situational assessment, it gives us more of a framework to understand what's happening and how to intervene. So just for a few minutes, if we could get in a comfortable position. And this is a perception practice, so you could have your eyes open or closed. It's different than meditation. We always talk about this real quick. A meditation practice is a state training practice. So it's a waking up practice, we call it. And a perception practice is a growing up practice. It's a practice to help us become aware of our own perceptual field and our own structure of consciousness. And once we do that, once we make it an object in our experience, in our awareness, it accelerates our own evolutionary process. So let's just sit, and so bring to your mind something about your current reality that's disturbing to you. And now think about why it's disturbing to you. Is it triggering anything in you that is just beyond this moment? And is it an ideological disturbance? Is it in your head brain? is it is it a philosophical thing, or a psychodynamic thing, or is it a, is it in your heart brain? Is it an emotional disturbance? Mostly, I mean, in terms of where you can feel it right now, or is it a guttural thing? Just you don't know what it is, but something's bothering you. You could feel, So, and then you want to kind of see if you could hold all three and look at all three aspects of this thing that is out there that is disturbing you. And now, coming from this subjective level, see if you can feel out and observe it in your relationships. Are other people close to you feeling the same thing, having the same disturbance? Do you disagree or agree on aspects of it? Or, it's like, and what are their perceptions of it, if you know? Then go out to, your family, or if you have a group of friends or whatever, and, you're part of a group. And then wider in terms of look at your faith tradition, or your culture, your subcultural field, and then take it out further into how is it reflected in the society? Are there a lot of others that are being affected by this? And is it part of a system, a social thing going on? And then if it is in the media sphere and it's part of what's going on at the political media sphere and all that, or there's a lot of disturbance around it or perception around it, then you could start to go into these higher fields. So is it part of the social media's civil war? Is there input into that? Or is there some kind of a collective experience going on that you're seeing at a more psychodynamic level? And can you look at it from the contextual field? Even expanding that out to the contextual field, like, so what's connected to this disturbance? And then kind of see if you could hold the evolutionary frame. And that is kind of like, just for a moment, look at yourself and go, all right, I am here in this moment. And if you can quickly reflect back on your whole life, your birth, your childhood, you just get it. If you could just have a visual kind of stream, just reflect back, like maybe a few images of yourself as you grew up, or whatever you can do to kind of feel that stream. And then see if you can hold the stream of your developmental stream with those of your family and your friends, and then expand it outward to all of humanity. See if you could feel what I like to call them moving now. It's the present moment with a sense of the evolutionary stream. So almost if you could feel the evolutionary flow, and you're in this moment in the stream. And how does the disturbance possibly fit into this? And then is this part of the great transition? And can we look at this from the collective self? If this is an experience that, or a disturbance that a lot of people are feeling, it's a collective self experience as well. And so what would there be is this a collective exposure therapy? And if it is, what would the lesson be? And now I'm just open to people now. Let's open the field and reflect. You can either share what you experienced or have questions. That's
John and Cynthia feel like showing up on camera, that'd be great. We could all say hello. You don't have to. I'm
no
not putting you
pressure.
on the spot. No pressure. Mild peer pressure. Hi, Cynthia. And Michael.
Beautiful space back there.
So I was going to say some of the things you were talking about. This whole pandemic and COVID and quarantine has, I think, moved a lot of people up into seeing a little bit more of a meta level, at least the systems level. Definitely people are more aware of how all of our systems are interconnected. So they saw this toilet paper shortage suddenly. They, oh, that's a system. You know, the medical system, the healthcare system is connected to other systems which supply them, and supply chains and all these different things. How it's really not a series of systems. It's one meta system that is on top of a series of systems. So I think people are feeling that. They're feeling
Definitely.
the COVID caste system, how there's not really a national lockdown. There's a lockdown for affluent people who are mostly staying home, and then there's no lockdown for people who have to actually go and serve them. So, you know, take care of all of the grocery stores and all the emergency workers and all the other people. So there's sort of a limited lockdown in a way because we have essential workers. So a lot of these things I think are being unpacked by just by people having to stop and stay home and look at them. So
that's the beauty of coming from the meta level, especially the collective self level, is we can see that everything that is happening is for our evolutionary growth. The shadow coming up, the shadow has to come up, and it's coming up right in our faces in all directions. And so when we can hold that, it's required for us to make the transition, to face polarization, to face this kind of to face the realities of the system we created, and all that, all of these things. We have to kind of, if we hold the meta level, for me, it's less overwhelming when I realize that what's happening is a collective exposure therapy process, and look at it from that. It's that reframing gives me a capacity to be able to intervene with less panic. Helps me to think more clearly and meditatively on it, to stay back and not be instantly hooked in, unconsciously hooked in. And so, as Jonathan was saying, and that I think maybe that is what the ancient Chinese were doing when they made the symbol for crisis the same as opportunity, is recognizing that every crisis has a gift. And if we can get into that frame, I believe the most powerful intervention we can do is looking for the lesson, looking for the gift, and helping to bring that out. So if we could learn the lesson faster, then we'll have less suffering. It's like, I don't know about everybody else, but in my own life, it's often, the universe has to bring back the lessons stronger and stronger each time until I wake up. Sometimes it takes the cosmic baseball bat hitting me upside the head for me to kind of, all right, I'll deal with the problem, you know? So, you know, in a way, that's kind of the grist for the mill that Ramdas always talked about, you know, that this is the grist for the mill of enlightenment or of evolution, is these kind of challenges outside of our comfort zone, individually and collectively. Yeah.
Mark, this is John over here, the invisible man who can't find his video, can't get his video to engage. So
it's okay.
I'm not intentionally lurking or anything. Maybe unintentionally. No, I'm out in the open. Okay.
We've never seen you looking better, John.
Okay. Thank you. But don't we all? Are we all beautiful when we're unseen in the sort of thing, in our ultimate selves? So I, so many things you said triggered some thoughts, but one of them was when this last part about collective self-experience, and you called it exposure therapy. And it got me to thinking about your point about not thinking about the unthinkable, or there's the unthinkable now. And so I ask, why is the unthinkable unthinkable? What makes something worthy of the electricity of thought? What makes it unworthy in our consciousness? Why do we not want to go there? So the first answer I get is pain. That there's this, when we sense something dangerous and threatening out there in the darkness, and so often the future is the darkness, represents the darkness to us. So we're afraid of the future, and our thoughts won't go there because of that fear. So how to, the irony is that where thought goes, electricity goes, illumination goes. So we're trapped. We're in this darkness of the fear barrier that hides in it's hiding in its own darkness, fearing a believed and imagined darkness. So how to break that, and what does it for me now? And the big issue is my awareness of the pain and suffering of the human race at this moment in time, the intensity of it. It comes to, maybe this is this meta larger something. It gets, if I allow that pain in to the point where it seems intolerable to me personally, that's exactly what I need. It needs to be intolerable. It needs to be so overwhelming that I will transcend, expand beyond my hiding in the darkness, fearing the pain of revelation. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I think, a test for individuals crossing that bridge, not wanting to suffer, but as I was saying, it's the suffering I pick up around me in the planet, in humanity itself, that is calling me beyond my own resistance to my own reactionary pain to that, so I'm not hiding anymore. And so I think as we individually make that jump, each of us individually, and then inspiring one another in the same way we're infecting one another with the darkness, but inspiring one another to cause a chain reaction where enough of us will sway the collective field. So that's what's on my mind.
Cool. I think you're right on there. And I would expand that even further. So it's what you're talking about is one dimension of a process. So it's like individually, it's kind of this fear pain threshold, this kind, and also we're afraid that our actual foundational level of the pyramid in Maslow's thing, our safety and security foundation will be rocked if we open ourselves up to even think about, the Holocaust, this, when we're going into those zones, anything horrific that, is just too intense to even think about. And it's also imagining there's another level where from the stages of development level, there is, it affects how we perceive these things. So it's like, what we'll often do is if we're at, say, when we talk about, I don't know if everyone is familiar with meta theory or like integral theory and meta modernism or spiral dynamics. But the idea here is there's different stages of development, different structures of consciousness that we evolve through individually, collectively, our technologies evolve through them, everything is kind of co-evolving. And so this is happening in that kind of co-evolutionary field. So there's a lot of what we call tetra-evolutionary forces happening. So what you're talking about is part of that tetra-evolutionary field happening between the structures in our field, in our collective field. Then even if you come from the collective self level, then we could actually add that, yes, we have to get enough individuals to cross the threshold to be able to face the shadow, to think about the unthinkable, for it to reverberate. But we also, I believe that the collective cognitive dissonance is also being driven not just from the individual level up, but from the collective level down, which is, we haven't learned the collective lesson yet. So the collective self, it's almost like part of our organism doesn't want to wake up and part of it does. And the part that doesn't is kind of holding on. And it's almost like that's what the exposure therapy is for. So it's like, so besides our individual, as John was bringing up, our individual fear, pain, the barrier, there's also a collective field that happens that until we kind of start to learn the lesson, it's almost like we can't get the answer into the field. So if I figure out what's going on and try to tell everybody, nobody will listen to me. If I say the emperor has no clothes, the collective will not hear if the collective is not at the point where it can hear. It's not reached the exposure therapy moment of being ready to receive the lesson.
What is the threshold for the collective? Where is that? And how does it come and when does it come? And what does it come from?
I'll give you an example. If all the research from different domains is correct, the transition we're going through requires a shift from nation-centric to global-centric social system structures. Because right now we still have a rational industrial nation state system at the social sphere level, while our technologies are 2 or 3 stages beyond that. And our populations are stratified across that gap. So that's a evolutionary systems perspective there. So we have that kind of gap and field that we're dealing with here, that all this is happening in. And so it's not like a clean and simple thing. So if you could ask your question again, can you see it from that perspective?
From the perspective of it being a complex, not clean, is what. So if it's not clearly or cleanly seen, then it must transcend. It must be in a transcendent place. What I'm thinking, it must, because when you're confronted with the problem, the overwhelming complexity of the current problem, it seems to do just that. It overwhelms the mind, and it feels impotent and unable. So it must be a transcendent, something that comes like a light into the mind of the. But so when you mentioned system, I'm thinking, is a system a kind of mechanical creation of multiple minds through centuries and millennia that builds up through time? It's a kind of like a stone castle that's floating around us. It's a mechanism. It needs a soul behind it, either to destroy it or expand it, and what is that soul? That's why I was talking about the individual. The individual is not separate. I think the individual is linked to a higher level unity.
Right, the individual is the collective, and the collective is the individual.
Exactly. So there's a powerful, a clear, powerful unification between those two levels in oneself and in the collective at large. So what brings this about? Where do we go to get to there?
Well, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, so I was going to bring this to, I'm sort of the concretizer. I try to make things concrete. And our thing that we've talked about elsewhere is that we have multiple structures of consciousness, as Mark said. So we still have a percentage of our population who have a center of gravity that's sort of between mythic and rational in the integral sense, or pre-modern and modern. Those are the sort of leanings towards nationalism, white nationalism, us versus them thinking, more traditional thinking in a way. But that's a developmental stage. Then we have, as Mark said, the rational industrial structure, which is all of our social systems and the governments and systems of laws and those. And we have the pluralistic structure, which a whole percentage of the population is at as well, which is sort of postmodern, deconstructing all of the various things that are happening, realizing that objective truth isn't always as objective as we think, and that you can't solve all problems just through the rational. But the next structure above that is the integral structure. And as Mark said, we have technologies that are advanced to that, and people at all these different stages are using these advanced technologies and weaponizing them. So the problem is knowable. It's just very complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, but I don't think it's that arcane in that sense. I think it's, we're most interested in educating media makers to understand this dynamic and then to be able to address their works specifically with the intention of helping different people at different structures to evolve upwards, because our future lies in helping to evolve all of consciousness upwards, up these very concrete and definable levels. Obviously there's a lot of slippage in the middle, but they are somewhat concrete and somewhat measurable, definable.
Yeah, and if you could kind of look at the arc here of the individual level and the collective self level, holding those two is a great dynamic, because then we could look at, all right, so how am I hooked into this? Where's my, like, how do I be the change myself? So if I look at, but what is the change I want to be? It helps to look at it from the collective self level. So understand, so like from the collective self level right now, I could say, really a fundamental kind of, I want to go back to where we started here. I left off. So in our evolutionary transition right now, real quick, we are, if we're being called to cross over from nation-centric to global-centric, then we have to make a shift from sociocentric to global-centric awareness. And what that is, it's like, instead of, but that shift requires a transcendence of polarity itself, of our polarity pattern of us versus them. See, if we're coming from a global awareness, a global centric awareness, we're not othering each other. So now this is a foundational paradigm shift that we're talking about here. Humanity has never had to face that shadow of our tendency to polarize and project an enemy onto each other. The us-them field. Through all the stages of development, in the first tier, we're still holding on to that duality. So now we want to try to find a way. So one of the great lessons from the collective self perspective is transcending the polarization field, is how I like to talk about it. And so once I come from that collective self-awareness and understand that a lot of these problems, the fundamental kind of connection is polarization, then I need to work on that in myself. I need to be the change. So if I go out into a rally or whatever like that, I need to be I need to be an instrument of change, being to transcend the polarization field for myself. So I'm entering a polarized field with a non-polarization field in my awareness. Then I'm an instrument of change. But that awareness comes from both what you were talking about, understanding the barriers in myself, the shadow material in myself, the calling of this, and the collective self gives us that collective frame for that process. So so if I'm not alone, there's a lot of us in that, and that particular challenge point, polarization, is required to make this shift. So if I know that, then I have a very clear, concrete target.
The
polarization.
Yeah, the polarization.
And collectively.
Yeah.
So if I'm capturing a video of a polarized field, I need to be able to come in and try to transcend that polarization through my witnessing.
So so the polarization, one way it begins is with the othering. And the othering is coming from the assumption that the other is a kind of alien force outside the consciousness and I know and understand to be for myself or my tribe. It's outside, that field. But so wouldn't and this kind of puts, what I'm going to say here combines with what Jonathan was talking about with the complexity. As he was speaking, I was seeing these vortices and circles all around in the background, his background. It's that complexity we're living in of all these systems, but his head's in the center. They're all coming out of from his center right there. And so at the center of what humanity is are some very simple, fundamental, we call them, there's the golden rule. There these laws of consciousness, like so empathy is a pathway. When the other only seems another because I'm I'm not seeing the other's fear behind his hate, behind its hate, you know, or I'm not identifying with the origin in that those others that are looking so crazy to me. But when I find the craziness within myself and know that it exists in a seed form in every human being, then that's a simplicity that enters the complexity and begins to solve it, but not more complexity.
Right.
I find that
that's
more.
The key. You're right. We have to find a simple frame for us to plug into. Like a really simple frame that I found is basically that the idea of the collective self itself. So recognizing that I am actually a wave in an ocean that has forgotten. I am a wave that has forgotten it's part of an ocean.
See,
you know,
yeah,
it's seeing the collective self. You know, it's like all of these beings that I'm seeing outside myself are not. When Mother Teresa was asked how she can be around so many, you know, horrible suffering and you know, maimed people and disease and all this stuff, and just keep going, and you know, and you know, but they said, you know, seeing all these lepers and this and that, and her answer was, I don't see sick people, I don't see leper, I don't see, I see my Lord. So almost every faith tradition has this concept of the collective self in their own field. If you've ever been around a bodhisattva, an enlightened person, it's almost as if they're speaking from the collective self. When I saw Krishnamurti, he never said the word I or me. It was always we. We are having a conversation. And you could almost feel this collective field. It's like there were 500 of us or more in that oak grove listening to him. And after he was done, we all walked out in silence. And then people started saying, did you feel that? Did you feel that? And it was like we had this collective experience. The guy just sat there and talked to us, but it was like, it was this plugging in to the collective. So I find that if we work on that type of a practice where you're getting, you're kind of recognizing, even if you have a rational scientific frame, bring your awareness to the molecular level. That really my body and your body and the air between it and this circuitry between us, there's no separation at the molecular level or the atomic or the subatomic. It's just vibrating fields in an ocean of molecules, in an ocean of atoms. So fundamentally, it's who we are. And if we hold that, we're automatically out of the polarization field.
But in order to hold that, you have to kind of move to at least the pluralistic structure of consciousness. So that's not necessarily accessible to everyone at the moment.
No.
But
if you're a media shaman trying to help people, see, the shaman has to go to these other realms in order to heal. And the shaman, like in the ayahuasca ceremony, the medicine and how it moves through the body of the person being healed, the shaman understands what they're going through from this higher perspective, from the plant medicine perspective. They understand the consciousness of the plant medicine and what it's trying to do, and it can interpret what needs to be done because the shaman is operating at these other levels. So if we're going to try to help people through this transition, it really is important for us to be able to see these other realms, see these other dimensions, to get as big a picture as we can, because, and especially now, because our technologies have reached a point where the collective propaganda programming is so powerful that the polarization field is being magnified and intensified on purpose from many directions.
Let me say one thing that, on the practical level, the media saturation, whenever we try to plug into the story, the news, so-called news, you know, the word news is the same word origin as noise. And I think of it's a static out there, like it's a certain static level. And the more news you get, the less informed you are, because it's interfering with the, it's not, to use the word sound, it's not sound, it's not psychologically sound to get this surface news, you know, it's not giving you the story. You used picture a moment ago. It's at the level of pictures. Yeah. A picture takes all the warring parts and pieces, like when you said the ocean, you know, that's a picture of unity, a picture of oneness.
Now oneness, oneness. Okay.
So that
oneness can be reached by emptying or by overflowing. So,
and the two are
the difference between Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. Their goal is both Buddha nature, Buddha mind, that empty mind. But Zen does it through deconstructing and transcending of complexity. And Tibetan Buddhism does it by diving deep into complexity to a point where you transcend it. So you can go through complexity, or you could go through the whole complexity sphere, or you could try to go through it and take it apart to get to the beginner's mind.
So it's like a jigsaw puzzle. You've got these little tiny pieces. You've got 1,000 pieces put together to get the picture, right? And so that's what we do with our minds when we're trying to fit all the pieces together, and eventually the picture emerges, right?
Now this is a great point. Yeah, I want to bring this. Go ahead.
Well, I want to challenge the etymology of news. That's not the right etymology. The etymology of news from Middle English, N-E-W-E-S, is new things, tidings of new things. So it can be tidings. It can be the shaman bringing that back.
What's the good news?
That realm, because that's what shamans do, right? Or the good news. Yes, exactly. So I don't know where that other etymology comes from, but it doesn't come from my dictionary.
Well, I know it doesn't. I've got about 12 etymology dictionaries, and I do these.
But you chose that one.
Yeah, I chose it because of the impact it has whenever I try to inform myself with.
Right.
I found an intuitive connection between that particular entomological
right.
Part, and the entomology is a study. It gets very complex because the origins tend to branch out into many different groups. But
so I'm going to step in here a second because we're actually running out. We're basically kind of out of time. We're over time a little bit. I just want to know if we want to hear anything from Michael or Cynthia, if they have anything to add to the discussion before we kind of wrap it up. Love to hear from you guys.
Yes, thanks for having this. This is remarkable that I was just coming in a few minutes late because I've spent the weekend on retreat with Thomas Hubble where we're talking about collective trauma, and I had no idea what I was walking into. But that is to say, I wanted to acknowledge Thomas's comment in the chat. He seems to have come from another place. So these voices are rising from different places. So we're starting to create coherence around this from these emerging resonant groups, which is quite fascinating. I'm reminded of Barbara Marx Hubbard saying that this crisis is a birth, right? Back to what Mark was saying earlier. And I'm really focusing in on the concept of fear as we've been discussing that and what a barrier that feels like, and pondering the notion of how can we as storytellers create that fearless network of interconnectedness to eliminate that. And there's tremendous opportunities because never have we been this conscious of it.
Yes.
Allow ourselves to make this turn on the spiral of evolution. So in many ways, we're the technology that we've been looking for. It's our innate power. So it's through the stories that we can actually eliminate the fear and bring it alive for people, giving them a safe space to use their imagination first, if that feels safer, before they actually start to connect to their personal sources of trauma, which I'm just really beginning to grab onto the concept and understand that there is no separation between the personal and the cultural trauma, which is a message of oneness, but trauma, it feels so personal that it kind of creates this frozen part of us that we feel aloneness within and around, right? But I think what I'm kind of putting together as possibly part of the story that I felt kind of an impulse to try to create coming out of our conversation is how to address it when we're, how to put into story a response that illustrates a more conscious reply to that fear and frozenness. And I think if we do not do it within ourselves, just as we were talking earlier, we can't really show up for others. And what it really requires is a pause. It's not so much an action, because until we're healed in that, our tendency is to react instead of responding responsibly. And I'm really led back to a creation on See Good TV when we did the COVID special. And I imagined in my storytelling exploration exercise, if I could channel COVID, what would it say to me? And the answer I got was, when empathy is achieved, I am complete. So I think this pause that can be used as the kind of the melting factor of those frozen spaces of trauma. That pause is for social witnessing on this meta level that Mark is talking about, because if we pause and truly witness those moments of fear and pain and trauma, and truly pause to feel what others are feeling, then we enter into this larger state of empathy and compassion. And it's only from there, I think, we can create those fields, those networks of fearlessness through our stories.
The key is witness. The key is bearing witness. When this is the key for everything, is making it an object in our awareness. To bear witness to it is making it an object in our awareness. And that's what Gurdjieff was talking about, to heal trauma and stuff is, and Gurdjieff talked about being able to be with it without attraction or aversion is the challenge. And Ram Dass would say, sit down and have tea with it. The idea is that actually the most powerful intervention is exactly what you're talking about, that bearing witness. That if we could, as you were saying, is help people to bear witness to the fear, to be able to see it as an object in their awareness, it takes away some of its power.
This is
it
a
gives us the
challenge.
power to do something about it.
What you're speaking of, Mark, is a challenge, because that thing that keeps human beings in the dark, in fear of the pain, or what Cynthia was talking about, the trauma. That is such an overwhelming thing. It's like your God is asking you to walk into the fire, to jump into hell,
Yeah.
And this is why it's so problematic, how to persuade someone here. Here's the blazing furnace. Come with,
Well, first of all, you have to start where they're at. You can't just go in. You just can't go in for it. You have to start where they are,
right,
and get them and find a way for them to project and identify,
And
then bring them on a journey to the witnessing. That's the process. You can't just, say,
well,
here it is.
No, I agree, but I think it's a promise. It's a promise of happiness beyond. It's a promise of a joy. It's that beyond when you cross the threshold, that it's the will to prevail to the other side. If you can glimpse on the other side of that battle, that's what an inspirational thinker will do. That's where Martin Luther King was able to inspire people to walk into, clubs and police and violence and all that. It's an inspiration that overcomes the hesitation, right?
Yeah, it was coming from that higher field, but he shared with them that higher field. If you look at the film Selma, it really beautifully explores how Martin Luther King was actually a meta thinker. He was an integral thinker. He was looking at, when he was planning the whole process for Selma, his target was actually, he believed that if people actually saw what was happening firsthand, that they would wake up. And so for them to kind of nonviolent walk in, and then it was a keto moment where he used the media and the act. So he was like this really kind of hardcore thinker. And even in the film, he talks about, how, the goal is to wake up white consciousness. Actually said that in the film. I don't know if he actually said that in real life, but his goal was to awaken white consciousness. And so coming from that higher perspective, he was coming from a more systemic perspective. That's the power. He's coming from the meta level. Gandhi was coming from the meta level.
And I'll wrap this with
the most powerful social change agents come from the meta level.
Yep. If you
In
read
a military campaign, the generals usually will find the highest place above the battlefield they could find in order to observe what's going on and be able to understand it and predict and work with it. And that's the
and what
same
he was really saying is, I see you and I feel you as a specific part of this whole, which not only allows someone to be seen and heard and starts to melt the fear, but also brings them into the collective at the same time, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, there's a beautiful healing there when we know we're not alone. That's I made a film about a stutterer. And as a stutterer, I made a film about a stutterer and shared that with stutterers. And one of the most common responses from stutterers was, I no longer feel alone. So when we see somebody on screen or in the thing going through something we've gone through, it makes us feel less alone. And it gives us more kind of faith, it can give us more hope and incentive and inspiration to, to head there ourselves.
So we should probably wrap this up since we're well over our hour, but we can still hang out and chat if you want a little bit. I don't know if you're up for that, Mark, but I do want to also give a quick plug for ourselves for our Media Shaman Toolkit, which is available on Conscious Good right now, which basically is addressed at media makers and helping them basically to not preach to the choir, which is what a lot of pluralistic filmmakers do without realizing it. They just put these things out and assume that every viewer in the world is going to be resonate with their field. And in fact, they're actually preaching mostly to people who are already in their field, which is not the people you need to reach. You need to reach the people who are not like you. And then also how not to stoke the fires, because there's an awful lot of polarization field on both sides, an awful lot of feeding the fire rather than trying to step out of it. So that's what the Media Shaman Toolkit is for. And we also have a course that will be starting up again in January, the Transformative Media Creation and Reception. You can go to mediashaman.org, which is our site where we have a clearinghouse for all our stuff. And that's a 15-week course that basically is a perceptual operating system upgrade for your mind. So thank you, everyone, for being here. We really appreciate it. Do we want to hang out a little bit, Mark, and chat a little more?
I could chat a little bit more if people
we
want
can hang out.
Well,
So.
yeah, Mark, I did want to respond to your last point too.
Sure.
So is this the hangout time? Have we now transitioned to that or not yet?
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
We're still recording,
Okay.
but we wanted to kind of at least give us a out point.
Yes.
That is in a certain time frame. And now, if everyone, wants to stay, or if only a few people, or, just for a few more minutes, that'd be cool.
Okay, so your last point, when I introduced the name of Martin Luther King, and then you expanded upon that, I wanted to expand a little bit on your expansion, but not total expansion, but also focus is what I'm looking for here, and that is when a figure like a Martin Luther King, or a great orator like Krishnamurti, not necessarily orator in the classical fancy kind of fancy pants sense, but a certain energy, an atmosphere they create. It's a kind of welcoming to a larger sense of belonging, to a larger group framework. And so much of the what we see in the present dilemma is we have this dividing into tribal factions. And the individuals within these tribes are seeking one thing, and that is belonging.
Okay.
They have found their tribe, they have found their group. That impulse cannot be suppressed. It rises up, that need, it is a fundamental need. So the task would be to get beyond this impasse, this polarization might be take that sense of belonging and make it welcoming to a larger group identity that expands to include beyond your religion, beyond your culture, your own culture, beyond your nation, to the planet, and beyond the planet to the solar system, and perhaps it never ends. I mean, but that sort of sense of belonging would melt the divisions created by a tribal identity, which was also based on the same longing for belonging.
Yes, the tribal is part of us. And one of the things it talks about in meta theories is when we evolve through the stages of development, We transcend and include each stage. So it's always inside of us. And so once we understand, the key is we have to kind of get as many of us as we can up to the level of seeing that polarization is part of the stages of development, but we want it to be an object in our awareness. So we're not caught in it. We could play with it. So, we could have fun in it. We could have it in a healthy way, but not, be caught in it.
Yes.
So we could choose to,
It doesn't have to be such a drag.
Huh?
It doesn't have to be such a drag. It can be.
No, and each stage has its values that are fundamental, like the mythic structure, the traditional structure, which is a very powerful, polarized us-them field, also gave us valor and honor. High qualities, that are, it also gave us the mythic quest,
yes,
that higher inspiration to, to go beyond, where, to go beyond where no person has gone before, right?
Right.
That is all mythic. So we don't want to kind of just, say, oh, everyone's got to be a bodhisattva and walk around coming from the we space.
Those are all rungs on the ladder. Those are all stepping stones.
Right. They're all part of the wholeness of who we are.
But when I look at there, I think qualitatively, I can see differences between certain rungs of the ladder, certain stages, and the values that are promulgated there. Like, so you have the warrior ethic and loyalty. Let's say take loyalty to your comrades, which creates this unity of comrades, on the battlefield and all that, which is very practically necessary. But when we get to a point beyond the war concept, the war thought form, then loyalty is not enough. So you can have like a dictator who demands loyalty, and within that framework, loyalty is the highest, moral ethic. It looks like, but outside of that, when you look beyond the war thing, when you look beyond the nationalist thing, or the mobster kind of thing, loyalty then no longer becomes a high stepping stone, and it's a stepping stone. Well,
loyalty becomes the target of loyalty expands.
Yes, you're right. But
the circle of care, as your circle of care and concern expands when you evolve.
Yes, you're right.
Your loyalty extends to that wider field. So
yes.
My loyalty then becomes to the human race. And if the human race is under threat, then that is where where I fight. That is where I become the warrior.
You're quite right.
Protect my race.
What I think I'm saying is you're quite right about that expansion. I think the problem is that the concept gets stuck in a narrow place. So so like a word like loyalty now is still commandeered by this earlier structure. It needs to be creatively expanded into new realms. Yeah.
One of the other points here is that every structure can become pathological as it's trying to transition to the next structure, so that loyalty and duty are great things, but they can become pathological if they start to transcend higher values. And that's actually what Game of Thrones, I don't know if you watched that show, but that was all about the transition from mythic to rational. And that spends a lot of time setting up oaths, as I took an oath to the king, an oath this, and breaking an oath is worse than stopping a genocide, actually, to a lot of the people there. In the beginning, we kind of learned. So it's about that transition from mythic to rational, where sometimes, I took an oath when I was 22, but now I'm 40 and I realize I don't have to be bound by this oath just because it's some kind of thing. I'm actually now more mature and I can move to the rational stage and realize that I can let that oath go.
So, Jonathan, does it mean it was like a premature leap? Where it skipped a stage, jumping from an oath to, let's say jumping from like this quest for power for its own sake, which has brought such devastation and destruction to the earth. There's an intermediate stage, which is that point of developing a bigger heart, a compassionate, the sense of empathy has been skipped. So when you jump from loyalty and duty straight to power, you skip that level that would
Well, as
avoid.
Mark said, it's about your circle of care and concern. So in the mythic structure, you have empathy only to the people who are like you, the people who are in your tribe. So it starts with your family, then it's your tribal group, and then so you have empathy for them, but no empathy for anyone outside of that. So that's
Right.
what the mythic structure is. So it's not like people who are in the pre-modern stage had no empathy or didn't love their families. They just had a natural
Yes.
cutoff of where their circle of care and concern was. And as
And
you move
also
up
it's
that
important to
ladder,
understand, yeah, so that we have multiple lines of development at different stages. So if I could be cognitively, high up there, but emotionally way down there, and so
Yeah.
we're a lot more complex than, but we'll tend to have a center of gravity that we operate from. So, but we still have all the structures in us, and we still have these multiple lines. So our cognitive development can be here, our emotional development could be here, our relational development could be, so it is tricky in terms of all that as well. It's not so
Yeah.
simple.
there's nothing weirder than someone who's like a diehard Trump supporter who also has a butterfly collection or something like that. These things that seem like they wouldn't go together, but we all have
Well,
different lines of development.
We're very complex. We're
Yeah.
all complex beings.
A good example of that I've seen on social media. I've seen a lot of my friends, unfriend or it's pretty common that person they can't tolerate, you unfriend them, and but instead of doing that, I've watched all these transitions of people going to the opposite side, but I've kept listening to them, their conversations, and so when I do photography, a lot of photography of these beautiful images and words to go with them, kind of poetic language. And when I insert those, everyone on both sides, they're not each side or each faction they all come in and they celebrate it. They all come together, not realizing that they're coming together perhaps. But if I were to insert, the political issue or the social issue, then they're all polarized again, So isn't there some clue in that? In
Definitely.
that
That's
factor?
a great observation, actually. It's a great observation. Yeah, there's certain things that transcend the polarization field. Art is one of them.
Yes.
Humor is one of them that could transcend, just the right type of humor can transcend the polarization field, depending if it's not coming from a specific ideological frame, but from outside. Jonathan's a magician, so a good magic trick, can get at everybody, no matter where you are. It's like, oh wow, it's like, so you could, so there are these kind of more liminal spaces we could enter. That is a shared space, so that, yeah, and so that is a great kind of observation and the problem with social media is that we tend to kind of get caught in that polarization field and not, get try to get caught in that transcendent field. But what we don't want to do, see, what I think is we should understand that there are ways that we can connect with everybody. In old Hollywood, they had a phrase: you have to have the main character pet the dog. That was the phrase. if you want your audience to like your character, they got to pet a dog in the first 5 minutes.
Or if you want him to be a villain, you have to kick the dog.
Right. So that was like, but petting the dog or kicking the dog is universal, right? So it's kind of like you want a universal kind of, like
Yeah.
get these kind of moments, but we also want to have a transcendent experience itself. So it's not just heading off. It's one of the things that a lot of us at the pluralistic and higher levels can get caught in is mostly the pluralistic is thinking I could just meditate and be at peace and everything's going to be okay. Where if you're in a situation, well, you're in a situation where it requires action, the bodhisattva acts. The bodhisattva does not sit outside. It's what Martin Luther King and what Mahatma Gandhi were doing. They were coming from a spiritual place, but it was one of action. Spiritual, they were acting. They were bringing into the action field. So, but what we can see is there is the way that we could break the polarity field as media makers by like expressing art and that kind of beautiful things that can transcend that space. But we also want to be able to create media that takes them from where they are through their shadow and helps them find ways to transcend those. So we want to give them moments of peeking over the fence. This is what Ram Dass, used to talk about with psychedelics. Psychedelics gives you the kind of momentary peak of what's over the fence, but then you lose, and
Yeah.
But then practice but the only way to get over the fence is through practice.
Yes.
So it's the same as so we could take people out of the polarization field for a moment and let them feel what it feels like, but it's going to only be temporary unless we also take them through the trauma or take them through the shadow. And this is what I love about Tantra. This is what I love about Tantra is it's a recognition that the only way to the light is through the darkness. And it's in Star Wars too. It's like, Luke, has to go into the cave. And Yoda says, the only thing in the cave is what you bring with you, the shadow. So we have to go in and face the shadow. We have to go in and face our stuff. So as media makers, we want to give people a taste beyond the polarization field, but also give them a path to try to transcend what's blocking them, to have that as a permanent experience.
That story is a great analogy because it really helps me if I stop to think of it this way, that integrated history is presence. So as we move from nonlinear thinking that divides our past, our present, and our future into one integrated moment, you could think of those moments of discomfort as kind of history knocking on the door, trying to bring forth the lessons learned into the present. Because if we can't do that, that's where we get stuck. And your story from that film just reminded me of that. But there's some great opportunities in creating a new narrative around that concept, at least for me.
Yeah. I think for me, I need to kind of end.
Wrap this up.
I need to wrap up. So.
I'll also say if you want more of this discussion, some of you know, Michael, you probably know about this. We also have a podcast. I haven't been updating a lot, but the TEHNC podcast, which stands for The Emperor Has No Clothes. And Mark and I have done a lot of discussions of films, including Black Panther, which we think is the most sophisticated film we've ever seen, disguised as a Marvel superhero film and other films. So if you check out the TEHNC podcast on YouTube and Vimeo, and also Media Shaman Toolkit and come by every month. We do this Media Shaman Studio, and we'll be doing it again. If you want to get on the Integral Cinema Project mailing list, we send out an occasional newsletter. You can throw your email in the chat or send an email to us or hit us up at mediashaman.org. And thank you very much again. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Cynthia and Michael and John and
Thank you.
And
Tom, who had
everyone,
to drop off.
stay safe, stay well, and stay awake.